Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a Friday reading for the last week of May. Two novels, Plume by Will Wiles, The Stubborn Archivist by Yara Rodrigues Fowler, and a non-fiction, The Violet Hour, Katie Royf. I think that's how you pronounce her name. So we're going to start with Will Wiles. This was a very schizoid read for me. About 2/3 of it I thought were brilliant, 5-star. And then 1/3, although they're not in clearly defined, sections of the book, 1/3 was really gruelling, not pleasant to read, sort of 2-star really. So the setup is, the book starts where a lifestyle journalist is in an editorial meeting where the magazine team are sort of putting together the ideas for the next magazine. And he has the idea that sort of an author hero of his who wrote a book about being mugged in London, which became a huge success, but has since then has sort of dropped off the map really. Has not produced anything apart from some essays, but not really, has dropped out of public life, and he wants to do a follow-up with that. The others around the table are sceptical because they like new thrusting news stories. And if this guy's done nothing in 15 years, then where's the news in that? So they demand that he has a backup in case he doesn't get anything useful for that, of going to profile a London property developer who is sort of re-landscaping the face of rundown parts of London, whose backstory is a sort of, from rising to sort of huge wealth from nothing. So they're all sort of tilting for him to do that. So they agree that he's going to interview both in the same week and bring back at the next meeting, and they can decide which one is going to make for a better piece. And while he's in this meeting, he hears a bang, a huge bang that no one else hears. His sort of water on the table starts frothing and seething. No one else can seem to see that. And he has this terrible sense of a burning smell that again no one else can seem to sense. And pretty soon you realise that these are hallucinations because he is suffering from the DTs, deliria tremens, that is from alcohol withdrawal, because he is a barely functioning alcoholic, this guy. So this brings me to the parts of the book that I didn't like. Anytime he is on his own and he's debating with himself, doing bargains with himself, reasoning with himself about, drink and, should he do this or should he do that? And it always defaults to him having a drink rather than doing anything else. As I say, they're gruelling, you take no pleasure in them. I didn't feel sympathetic for him at all. At times I just thought, oh, come on, man, shake yourself out of it, which I don't like feeling that because I know this, any addiction is a sickness, it's an illness. My father was an addict. I grew up with this. But it's so, I don't see what this was bringing to the table, because addiction and the nature of addiction and the forms of addiction and how it plays out have been written so many versions. Do we need another one? This gives no new insight. I don't think it's possible to give any new insight into how these addictions play out. It's well done. There's he explains how this guy never falls asleep. He has to black himself out through drink to sleep, or when he's sat in his flat, all the different ways that he can get up off the sofa and walk. He can go and transcribe the recorded interviews, or he can go this way and actually write the piece that he's supposed to write, or he can go to the front door and go out to meet a friend who's on social media saying, let's hook up. But no, every time, the need, as he calls it, cuts off all of those escape routes, and the only pathway that is available is from the sofa to the fridge for the next can of drink. So, very well done, but not enlightening, offering nothing new, and remorseless, and unfortunately for the plot to work, he has to have that he has to be that type of character. But I did not enjoy any of those bits where he's on his own, he's doing these sort of ludicrous and quite long, protracted thinking out. I need to do this, but if I do that, I could shave 10 minutes off it and have a drink or stop off at a pub, and so that was a real downer for me. But let's move on to the really positive aspects of this book. So the author, where he goes to interview, has this huge map of London on the wall, take up the whole of the wall in his room. And he's got lots of post-it sticky notes where he's made notes, because he's basically into the psychogeography of the city. sort of myths and stories that attend to each of these places. And they basically go on a series of sort of adventures because the author himself has sort of repudiated that project. He was working on it for 10 years and it's gone nowhere. He hasn't published anything. And the reason for that is, he feels the inauthenticity of London. That, what is the point of digging up myths or creating new myths, that just take you away from the gritty material reality of whatever London is. So, for example, one of the trips they take together, there's this huge fire in a fuel processing plant on the far east of London, in a place called Barking. And they go to visit it. London is sort of, gripped by this story because it's such a huge plume, because it's, petroleum burning, that it's a major incident, but these two guys want to get as close as possible to it. And in doing so, it's in a discarded, rundown part of London, and it very much reminded me of Lee Rourke's The Canal, where there's a really well-written, sort of significant, making this sort of wasteland part of London, but bringing it, giving it significance in that sort of psychogeographical term, simply through the powers of description. So I thought that was really good. But their escapades sort of build and build and build, because the author is not the journalist. The author is constantly in search of the authentic and feels that he's getting further and further away from it, and he himself feels inauthentic. The other character, the property developer, is one of the major reasons for the inauthenticity of London, because London is constantly churning, constantly being redeveloped. And again, one of the places the journalist and the author go to is this redevelopment done by the other guy. They've gone there because it used to be a scene of high crime. It was a sink estate, or what the Americans call the projects. And when they get there, it's completely redeveloped into this sort of global village, really, where there's lots of sort of different fusion food stalls. Jurassic Park is sort of being projected on the sort of side of the building. People are stopping there to watch. It's become a sort of a pleasure emporium, which neither were aware of. So this sort of, where are the real people who used to live there, even though they lived there in fear, where have they gone to be replaced by these sort of corporate or tourist Londoners popping in for some sort of festival? So it's a really good book about the changing face of London. It's, its gentrification, its soul being removed. And it reminded me of Jonathan Letham's Chronic City in that respect, because that does the same for New York. The journalist, in his sort of decline, through his alcoholism, his house collapses because there was redevelopment going on, the two houses either side of him, and they've so weakened the structure and the heavy rainfall, and his house slides, collapses because the foundations are gone. So all the time they're talking about looking up in the sky at this huge plume of smoke, but actually the danger is beneath your feet. So I did think all that stuff about London was brilliant. Really, it's my city. I recognise it. There's a lot about social media, social networks, and the surveillance nature of social media. As you sort of, it tracks your movements, it tracks who you're hooking up with, and all that sort of stuff. That's also done really, really well in it. So as I say, it's a sort of a bit of a schizoid read, really, because I so enjoyed the stuff about London. I so enjoyed the stuff about, renewal. I enjoyed the social media, how that's sort of changing how human beings interact and increasing the sense of inauthenticity that the author has. But there was all that sort of, chronic alcoholic stuff. So it's hard to sort of give this a mark, really. I mean, 5 for the 2/3 and sort of 1.5 for the 1/3. I don't know what that averages out at. And just to give you an idea about some of the quality of the writing. So they've gone to the site of the fire and it's all blocked off. And there's a PR sort of tent, a media tent there for, to field media inquiries. And of course the journalist has got his journalism card, so they get in and they talk to the PR person. I know where you're coming from, Oliver. We tend to avoid totemic words like no and yes, because they are in fact more open to interpretation and inaccuracy than you might imagine. If I say no or yes, I'm confirming or denying the content of your question, and your question is open to interpretation. Indeed, I don't know exactly what you might mean by your question. what you might mean by a charged and flexible word like dangerous. So a crude answer like yes or no risks all kinds of semantic pitfalls. However, in answers such as Londoners have no reason to be alarmed, this is precise and useful. But it doesn't answer the question. It doesn't say if the smoke is harmful. It does more than that. It makes the event less harmful. No one should go out there and stick their head in the smoke. Police and fire service advice is to stay away. We're clear about that. But do you know what could cause more harm? Much more harm? Worry. Worry can impact your health in a dozen ways. Worry can shorten your life. Worrying about this event is much more likely to cause us harm than the event itself. By reducing worry, we are directly reducing the harm associated with the event. So I just think that's a brilliant sort of 1984 doublespeak, emptying of language. You know, even definitive words like yes and no are completely spun around. So, you know, I just thought that was supreme. And this is why, you know, the world of politics today, you can say anything to counter anything, because, you know, once you debase language like that with PR and spin, language loses all meaning. So you can say anything as a sort of counter to anything else. So I really like that, and there's plenty of that sort of thing in the book. And again, this is on the sort of self-surveillance of sort of social media networks and stuff like that. So he and the writer are looking, as I said, they were looking for a sort of an area of notorious sort of London crime, which has been cleaned up when they went to that sort of festival place. So this is again a search for you know, one of these old places. Curious to know if Pierce's instincts about South London were reasonable, I took out my phone and opened Tamesis, which is like a London-based sort of, you know, social media app. Best place to get mugged, I asked it. The bunk logo spun as Quinn's servers pondered the question. Did you mean best places to buy mugs? Best places to get mugs printed? Best places to get mug shots? So he retypes. Where in London has the worst street crime, I asked, trying to tailor my question to something the algorithm was equipped to answer. The screen took breath and began to fill with colour and information. Street crime offences by War 2010-2015. Data source Metropolitan Police. I tweaked the screen, zooming out. The familiar matrix of streets twitched and resolved. The river scooped up the neighbourhood. The broader shape of London cohered, the parks, the Thameses turns, but the data overlay was confusing, a marbled mash. My own borough, Westminster, stood out as being particularly bad, which puzzled me until I remembered the West End, all those drunks and tourists. That was where I had been mugged the first time. Kensington and Chelsea, rich, also appeared more dangerous than I expected, but I didn't like the chance of it happening to us if we tried there. So that is, in a way, that is the sort of the downfall of emptying language, because he's typed in best place to get mugged, which is a sort of vernacular, slightly slang term. And the algorithm isn't smart enough, or is cleaned up, is too much cleaned up. So it talks about mugs and printing mugs and mug shots and all of that. So, you know, there is sort of lots of stuff about sort of algorithmic, meaningless, emptied language in this book. And just to say here, it mentioned Kensington and Chelsea, rich. So Kensington and Chelsea is the richest borough in London, the most expensive houses. It's also where Buckingham Palace is, which is why it's called the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. And it's always been the sort of the safest conservative parliamentary seat through history. It's always been conservative, because naturally rich people tend to vote for preserving the status quo of tax and things like that. And in the most recent general election, 2015, for the first time ever, Kensington and Chelsea went to Labour, went to the National Socialists. And that was a sort of huge seismic shock. And the reason for that is because Kensington and Chelsea, all these rich properties, not all, a lot of these rich properties are owned by Russians and Chinese and people from the Middle East who only live here part of the year, if at all. And, you know, they're not registered to vote. And there's one part of the borough of Kensington and Chelsea, which is actually a place I lived when I first left college, called North Kensington, which is pretty slummy. And because the people there voted, they were enough to win the seat for Labour. And within 3 months of that seismic electoral result in Kensington and Chelsea, you had the Grenfell Tower fire. So it was like a tower block, which is so run down and not maintained properly, and, you know, didn't have the proper fire precautions, that 90 odd people burned to death there. And that sort of sums up the material fabric of Britain. I mean, not just London, because there are these sort of estates all over Britain which have not been properly maintained. But you have the two contrasts there. You know, you have the absentee rich in all these huge mansions, and then you have this sort of little ghetto, for want of a better word, of people in North Kensington who've been completely abandoned by the political classes and were literally left to burn to death. So, you know, that is why this book is so on the nail when it comes to, you know, a representation of London in the 21st century. You know, so I did think that stuff was superb. It's just a shame that the narrative voice was through a barely functioning alcoholic. So, on to Stubborn Archivist by Yara Rodrigues Fowler, who is, I think she's a journalist, but this is her debut novel. She is Anglo-Brazilian, and this is really disappointing. I was looking forward to reading this because it starts, you know, the style of it is you know, really enticing. So it sort of starts off quite poetic, various size of chapters, you know, sort of 2 lines or whatever. And it's note-like. So she's called the Stubborn Archivist because she's, in a way, this is a diary, but it's not a strict diary in terms of day-by-day entries. It's sort of quite notes. It's sort of core experiences are recorded, and not even necessarily a sort of formal literary prose. It's just sort of, you know, literally, as I say, sort of slightly truncated notes. And I like the idea of that. And it is about Anglo-Brazilian girl. Her mother is Brazilian, came over to London, married a man from Yorkshire, obviously English. Her grandparents still live in Sao Paulo, where her mother is from. So there's lots of stuff about her spending Christmases at Sao Paulo with the grandparents. And they're sort of, you know, they're always telling her stories, sort of fable-like stories. And then she, you know, she grows up, she becomes a young woman. And putatively, it's about the sort of trying to place yourself when neither place quite feels like home. So that in England, no one can pronounce her name properly. Or when a Brazilian tourist stops her in London to ask directions and she replies in perfect Portuguese and the accent is perfect. They go, oh, you know, how can you have such a perfect accent when you know, you grew up in London, all this sort of stuff. So she sort of falls between both stools. Now, that could have been interesting. But the problem is, this book is gossamer thin. You know, there's nothing to it. There's no content at all in here. Her life is profoundly uninteresting, unfortunately. Now, you can have good gossamer-like writing, but then it has to have a sort of a formalistic or a linguistic beauty. This does not. This is just light. And increasingly, I felt the writing was infantile. Well, not the writing, sorry. The subject matter was infantile. So, you know, there's a point here where mum, yeah, baby. And I don't know exactly how old she is, but she's definitely a sort of a late teenager. Can you teach me the swear words in Portuguese? I don't know them, and no one in our family really swears. She closed her eyes again. Sorry, it's not her. Yeah, she closes her eyes again. Tia Ana Paula swears, that's her aunt. Maybe not that much in front of you. Okay, but yeah, that's what I mean. I don't even know it when people are swearing. I can try and teach you. Okay, cool. Not that I've sworn in Portuguese much in the last 30 years. She picks up her mug, hovering her nose above it to test the temperature. And then there's a list of, you know, they go through these various Brazilian swears. But that's something you do when you're about 8 or 10. You know, for a grown-up to do it just struck me as bizarre. Okay, so on this next one, her grandfather has just died in Sao Paulo. So she's preparing to fly out for the funeral, and she's got all her English friends to sort of, you know, console her, keep her company, help her pack, that kind of thing. And then, you know, this is when they're in their mid-20s, I guess. And this is the conversation that takes place. But, you know, I wouldn't blame my mother if she left, Elena said. What do you mean? Like, I look at my mother and I wouldn't blame her if she left my dad, or had left us ages ago. Pause. G said quietly, me neither. You lay on the suitcase. Jade said, when my mum left my dad, I did used to blame her. Obviously not anymore. He used to go through her phone asking her, who's this, why did you text them, and other things. But your stepdad is good though. Yeah, she looked at you, and he is all right. I don't think he's anything special, but he treats her with respect. And it meant we lived in a nicer house and got to see my cousins nearly every year. And now my mum's done her masters. She has a job she loves. It's all right. It is good. You looked at Jade. Elena shook her head. She said, I don't think my mum would ever leave. My dad works, and actually my mum works too, but she does all the housework and all the cooking. That isn't even the bad bit. He's angry too. After my mum does all that for him, my dad is still an angry man. He has this thing that he would never hit any of us because his dad used to hit him. So instead he's like, do not talk to me like that. I will not have my daughter talk to me like that. I mean, the level of insight is, that's how sort of, 8-year-olds, girls having a sleepover might talk about their parents, not mid-20s. That's what I mean by infantilising. It's extraordinary, My mum's done her masters, she has a job she loves. It's all right, it is good. Literally, it's written, it is good, not it's good. And then, that thing where one of the other friends sort of says, oh, he wouldn't hit any of us because he'd been hit as a child, so he shouts a lot instead. I mean, it's just banal, utterly banal. And then, this by way of the last read I'm going to do, just the flow of the book. So it starts off when she's sort of talking about her parents before she's born. So presumably sort of family law passed down to her, or she's interrogated her parents for the information. And then it gets to her as a newborn and a toddler, and early memories of visits to Brazil for Christmas and stuff. And a lot of that early action takes place in Brazil, and as I say, it's her grandparents telling her these stories, which are very like fables. But clearly, the fables have not run, the storytelling ability have not run in the family, because this is an anecdote told by her mother when she was still a very young baby and was attending a friend's party, and it's on a bouncy castle. So last year at her party, she had a bouncy castle too. I wasn't here, but what happened was that a little boy was crashing from side to side and ran into another kid who elbowed his face, and he started crying, and when he looked up, Isadora saw that he had a tooth missing, just a baby tooth. But he began to cry even more because he was scared that he would not get money for it from the tooth fairy. The what? It's like a fada do dente. She is like Papai Noel. If you lose a tooth, you put it under your pillow, and in the night, she leant in and he leant in, and she spoke in a lowered voice, and in the night your parents will swap it for a coin. Aha. So Isadora and Richard had to pause the whole party and evacuate the bouncy castle to find this boy's tooth. Marcus looked at her, his face close to her face. And did they find it? They did. I mean, that is one of the most boring anecdotes. If you heard that at a party, you'd walk away. And that's what I'm saying. This book. There's nothing to this book. Another thing in the chronology. When she's 15, and this is quite a protracted piece in this, relatively, which moves sort of pretty quickly otherwise. She's going to make a flight on her own, her first solo flight to Sao Paulo to see the grandparents. And it goes into great detail about what she's packing. And this is about the identity of Brazilian English, what clothes, would she need in Brazil compared to what she has in Britain and all of that. And then she does, it's not clear throughout this long sort of piece whether she actually, she seems to be saying she never made that flight. So what is it? Is it all happening in her imagination? Is it a fear? Is it a projection? Was she actually meant to take the flight and going to take the flight and then backed out at the last minute? We don't know. That's what I'm saying. There is absolutely, nothing to this book. It briefly talks about irritable bowel syndrome that she has, and the effect that sort of wreaks on her sort of socially, how she sort of has to protect herself from being discovered in the toilets and stuff, and her relationship to her body. She takes lots of long hot soaking baths, presumably to sort of help soothe the IBS. But again, it's not analysed in any way whatsoever, in the same way as that airport solo trip, and when she ends up not going, it's not analysed, it's just reported neutrally. So I mean, this book just really annoyed me. I gave it 2.5 stars, 0.5 stars for the structure of the sort of notes. sort of diary form, you know, the fact that it wasn't sort of formalised language. But, you know, I'm not going to read any follow-up books that she has, I'm afraid. In the intro, I did say I'd talk about this, but we're already over 25 minutes, so I'm going to hold this book over to, I'll do a wrap-up of non-fiction books and include this. So, till next time, thanks very much.